On the economic warfare front, I think it's much preferable to kinetic war.
You need to hedge against times of uncertainty, and I think Bitcoin is a great hedge against that. I still think Bitcoin is probably the best hedge for that.
On the altcoin front, it's just looking horrible. There's no systemic bidder for any of that stuff.
I think there's another 10-15x left in Bitcoin to approach gold's market cap, and then the 4-year asymmetric cycle dynamic will disappear.
GM Onur, what a time to be alive. How are you doing?
Happening? I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Certainly a lot of stuff happening on the macro and tariff front. What's your first impression from the last couple of days?
It's interesting because to some extent, Trump is implementing what he promised. I did a lot of research on the implications of tariffs. I'm curious to see how it plays out from an economic perspective. At the end of the day, the consumer will have to pay the bill for it. So yeah, very curious to see how it plays out.
I find it pretty exciting because I'm only 23, so I didn't really live through the global financial crisis as a participant of the economy. When 2020 happened, I was only slowly getting into macro and economics and finance, so I wasn't really able to understand the full context of that either until then later in retrospect. But now it feels like my first time living through this big economic shift. And it's quite exciting because from a political incentive standpoint, it makes total sense what Trump is doing. You don't have to argue about the economic sensibility of it, but he promised he would put America first, support the American working class, and that is exactly what he is doing. If this actually ends up helping or hurting the working class in the US, it doesn't even matter. As long as his voter base perceives it as something useful, he is fulfilling his duty. And it is so funny because just a couple of days earlier, we talked about this thesis, okay, has globalization peaked or not? Has global trade peaked? And now suddenly the behemoth of global trade, which the US has become over the last 60, 70 years, being the first one that is putting an end to this game. And now the economic left, I never thought I'd see that day. They're suddenly pro-global trade and pro-free trade. And it's just all of this absurdism is playing out in such an unhinged and raw manner. It is really interesting to observe.
What do you think will happen, though? Because the main assumption is tariffs will lead to the creation of local production capacities or national production capacities. Because so far, due to globalization and low-cost manufacturing in the Far East, pretty much, not all, but a big chunk of production has been outsourced to low-cost countries. Do you think tariffs will actually lead to the ramp-up of national production capacities?
Are we going full industrial core again? I don't know, man. I think the highly specialized stuff will still be produced in a very globalized manner because you're not going to turn the Nebraska farmer into a silicon chip engineer at TSMC and onshore all of it. But I think many of the commoditized stuff, day-to-day goods, tooling, maybe cars, a lot of stuff with the first and second degrees of processing any type of good. There's now a stronger incentive to reshore it again. From an economic perspective, if you look at classical economic theory, this is going to be bad for global trade, it's going to increase costs, etc., etc. But on the other hand, we need to come to a realization that a blind reliance on global trade and global supply chains, totally ignoring the possibility of disruptions, which we've seen 5 years ago and which we've seen 2 years ago when that evergreen ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. It's just a naive approach. So we need to be able to hedge ourselves. If this is the right path to reconsider what we've done over the past couple of decades, I don't know. I'm not a macro expert, but it at least forces us.
Who is we?
To sort of reconsider that approach, and which I think is a good thing overall.
The most hilarious thing was how he held that sign with the tariffs, and it had China, Europe. Okay, so maybe to wrap up that topic, it's a very complex topic, and we're no experts in neither tariffs or economy. But I would say my concluding thoughts on that are consumer prices are going to increase. That's almost inevitable. And it's important to note, I think, that it's not the other countries that pay for the tariffs. It's at the end of the day, the consumer that will pay for the tariffs. Maybe there's a likelihood that imports are being reduced and other countries' exports, as a consequence, are being reduced due to tariffs. So in that sense, it affects their economy. However, yeah, the consumer, due to the scarcity of fewer imported products and them being more expensive, I think both will happen. Consumer will end up paying more. So that's one thing. And I mean, think of like the globalized economy. You're importing pretty much everything in every industry, even if it's a small part in the supply chain for cars, for example. Of course, they're going to get more expensive. Consumer technology products are going to get more expensive and all that stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is it's some sort of trade war that's being triggered because there will be a reaction from other countries. And again, I have no insight into what's going to happen there. It just doesn't seem right to spend time and energy on economic warfare with other nations intuitively. Again, no idea what's going on behind the scenes and geopolitically, but it feels wrong.
Why do you think that is? Because like, again, like I agree with like the mainstream assumption that this is going to cause like tons of economic disruption and they're going to like, also negative downstream effects. But just looking at it from a political incentive perspective, under the assumption that with 2020, thinking of like globalized humanism has peaked. And in order to not over rely on all of these interdependencies and not see some hidden conflict build up, which is then going to escalate, it does make sense in principle that these countries, these nation states, start focusing on their own individual interests again a little more.
That I agree with. I actually want my last point I was going to say is I do believe in ramping up production capabilities, whether it's digital or physical, whether it's factories or other means of engineering. Because one interesting thing that's happening with the adoption of AI in every field is I believe that fewer and fewer, or like less and less human labor will be required in the engineering and manufacturing process. And I think the only reason, or at least the main reason why engineering and production capabilities were outsourced is because human labor was cheaper in other countries and it was impossible to compete with that. However, if you change the equation where human labor, and I think AI is doing that, is 5 to 10% of the production and 90% is done by machines, then it's different. Then it's like, how much do these machines cost? How much does this AI cost? And how expensive is energy, electricity? So those things are cheap. You can have access to those things in the States, for example, and that gives you a new competitive edge. So if tariffs lead to production capacities being ramped up and in times of AI, less and less human labor being involved, it won't create new jobs. I think that is a fallacy because I think new production facilities need to be highly automated and not involve too much human labor, but it will create national supply of goods, which I think will be very interesting. So that's my main take. I think and even for Europe, I think Europe needs to as well rebuild up and ramp up production facilities and not outsource everything. So in that sense, it's interesting. What I was commenting on is more that is economic warfare really what we want? I mean, honestly, we maneuvered ourselves in this situation by what we consume, how we consume. So I think we could probably untrain all of these things, but it will take a long time.
No, I agree. On the economic warfare front, I think it's much preferable to kinetic war. So if we can settle our conflicts or at least like prevent building up conflicts that could escalate into kinetic war through economic warfare, I think this is an EV positive trait to take from a species-wide perspective. I think it's worth revisiting the original idea of tariffs, which in the past has been you tax goods coming from the outside into your country, and in return, you have a lower tax basis on income of the citizen. And in general, I'd say taxing stasis is much better than taxing motion. Motion primarily measured in terms of generating income, because you want to prop up your voter base and citizen base of your own nation with their incomes, and create the maximum amount of economic flexibility and spending power there. And if you look at this whole tariffs game, if it was played by another nation than the United States, I think it would backfire tremendously economically. But one thing we shouldn't forget is that the United States, by far, still has the largest consumer base and spending power and all of these things. So for many of these foreign companies, the US is their main market to distribute their goods to. And they have an incentive that consumption in the US of their goods continues. So they will not be able to 100% forward these price increases down to the US consumer. they'll have to bite the bullet, at least partly. That is one thing that I'd consider. Again, if it was another country, it would be much more difficult to go through with all of these measures. On the note of Europe, Europe is a very interesting case because Europe is large enough and different enough among these individual member states that we could reshore a bunch of our production and go the sort of more protectionism over free trade route and still function as a union, and in the mid to long term come out stronger. Because the consumption we would realistically lose or at least reduce due to that would be primarily useless consumerism, to put it all into that bucket, which is produced in these very low wage countries. If we have the assumption that in the mid to long run, human cost of labor matters less and less in the manufacturing space, then this is going to be a decreasingly relevant variable. The only thing we'd have to be very careful about is specialized technological production, thinking semiconductors, all of that stuff. But all the other stuff, I do see the case for nations profiting off of reshoring things there.
There's one more interesting component that we haven't discussed regarding the dynamics of tariffs, which is an import versus an export surplus. So it's no secret that the United States of America have an import surplus. They import more than they export. And then there are countries, European countries such as Germany, who have an export surplus. They export more than they import. And I'm very curious how the tariffs will impact that. I think there's many implications for this. For a country like Germany, for example, they're having billions in surplus because of the export. And for a country like the US, it's the other way around. However, they're getting the goods. So no value disappears. It's just being redistributed. It's kind of a zero-sum game, in my opinion. But Germany having been a highly export-heavy country, cars, manufacturing, machines, generators, and now, for example, tariffs coming into place, plus China picking up, I think electric vehicles changed the car manufacturing game tremendously. I mean, if you look at what's happening in China, I'm not even talking about Tesla. If you look at what's happening on the BYD front or with Xiaomi cars, it is truly insane what they've done in the last year. From being completely irrelevant and cheap, they transitioned to being superior, better looking, cheaper within a year. And I don't think that trend will discontinue. Personally, I was already looking at Chinese cars. I think my next car will be probably a Chinese manufactured electric vehicle. I'm not a patriotic buyer, but I think that's going to be very, very interesting in the long run. If you take AI and add it into the recipe, nations have to act now or they will lose the window to do so in the next 5 to 10 years. And that will determine their future, I think. So,
but what exactly
long-winded way. Go ahead. Again, if Germany, for example, falls behind on car manufacturing, Germany's business model, oversimplified, was access to cheap electricity from the east and high-tech car manufacturing edge locally and exporting them. If the demand for German cars reduces, the energy prices already increased. So we know what happened since the Ukraine war. I think their main business model is being disrupted heavily. And I don't think that is a positive outcome.
I agree with that. One thing that we could explore in another episode, maybe with someone who's thought this through a little more, is if you assume the AI is essentially going to take over manufacturing and production in the next 10 to 15 years. Let's take any arbitrary time horizon. And we don't have to concern ourselves with these basic goods to an extent that we need hyper specialized competence there, because it's all uploaded in the cloud. Does it even matter? Could this lead to sort of an automatic enforced degrowth, which is not degrowth? You know what I mean? We are not growing in the sense of having this one pristine good that we can export into the world, but the domestic economy is still doing well. So I don't think degrowth is the right term for it. I think the end result would be somewhat similar to what degrowth people imagine. I'm in no way aligned with their ideology, but it's relevant enough and proximate enough that we should think through these different scenarios downstream of AI and tariffs.
Yeah, I think it comes down to who will be able to build, integrate, consume, adapt AI faster. What's your bet? Is that China or is that?
Well, that's certainly not going to be the EU.
Exactly.
Unless people just, one thought that I've had for the past couple of years is, why do these people even comply? Why do you comply to a useless regulation. What is the EU gonna do? Send over the French army?
Let's not go there, but I think you have a valid point here. Let me give another example. If there is life at stake, it's only about survival and it's about keeping the patient alive. That's your heart, that's your brain, that's like your organs that are most important to you. Or another example, if you're drowning, the number one goal is to get that person out of the water. You don't think about the sun and its toxic radiation. You don't think about, oh, how can I be healthier? No, you have to act now. And once the severe situation resolved, you can think about how to improve your life. I feel like Europe is stuck with regulation and GDPR and all these protectionist measures, but they don't realize that they are drowning right now. Now is not the time to prioritize privacy. As harsh as this sounds, I'm very, very pro privacy. I protect it over everything, especially my own privacy on the internet. But what they don't realize is, what do you prioritize? If you don't prioritize joining and winning the AI race now, privacy won't help you. You won't be able to get out the positive effect of the measures you mean to have with the privacy regulation if you're missing out on the main thing that's going on right now. And I feel like Europe is missing out. I want to give one more example. Have you seen the European rocket launch?
Yes, sir.
Dude, again, it's easy for Europeans to shit on Europe, so that's why I don't have a hard time doing that. But the reactions from Europe were laughable. They were like, oh my God, great, Europe is entering the space race. Have you seen the rocket? It was literally, it came down sideways and it was not even close to where it started. And I was like, people aren't blind and people aren't stupid. So it's cool that they're trying to have skin in the game and not be sidelined. I kind of admire and appreciate that effort, but it's miles away. It's tens of years away from what SpaceX is doing. In that sense, I think Europe is the sinking ship right now, and I don't see what's going to change it. I'm still hopeful though.
I'm a big believer in like politics is downstream of culture, and to some extent also economics is downstream of culture. So what is needed is a cultural change. As sad as it is, with social media and the trend towards zero friction in information distribution and propaganda distribution, one movement within Europe that really nails the propaganda arc of reinstalling economic confidence and economic ambition in that continent, I think they can be quite successful. It doesn't really matter if there's a fundamentally good argument to do it, or if their argumentation is good. If they hit the right emotional triggers, if they nail distribution, they'll do pretty well in achieving their objectives. That will turn out well for Europe. I don't know. I'm not the one to judge that, but I do think it all comes down to a cultural variable.
Yeah, I agree. I don't fully agree on it doesn't matter what they say or what the messages are or what the facts are. It's only about like the emotions being transported. I actually think you're right, but I don't think that's a good thing. And
I'm not attaching any judgment to it. It's just an observation.
That is definitely, I mean, we're seeing that already. People don't care about facts anymore. It's just about who has more charisma and who transports the values that are closer to me more. But anyways, to not yap 4 hours, what else you got?
Is this bullish altcoins? I mean, that's the question after all.
Wow, that was a hard transition. What are altcoins for you?
Well, everything that is not BTC.
Bitcoin. Okay, nice.
You can also start out with, how do you think this impacts Bitcoin? Let's cover our crypto thesis and how we've adapted our own portfolios given the tariff news.
Let's actually start with Bitcoin, in my opinion. So I would say that in times of uncertainty, which I would say these are times of uncertainty, regardless of the disrupting change being a net positive, you need to hedge against times of uncertainty. And I think Bitcoin is a great hedge against that. I still think Bitcoin is the best hedge for that. Before transitioning to altcoins, let's talk about stablecoins, because most stablecoin adoption is USD based. And I think we're going to see more and more both USD-based stablecoins, but also non-USD-based stablecoins to further amplify trade between either the entire globe or more local communities. That's my immediate reaction. When it comes to altcoins, I would put them in the category of speculation. And I don't think times of uncertainty favor speculation. My initial gut feeling is that it will not benefit altcoins until there's some sort of certainty. Meaning things will probably go down, find the bottom, go sideways before they go up, but eventually they will go up again and everything, the market will pick up. I think in the short term, it's probably not that optimistic.
I largely agree. I think Bitcoin is the supreme system hedge asset. In the short term, it's probably bearish just because it's like still considered very risky and like a very liquid market 24/7. So whenever there's a sell-off, like it's going to be hit first. What I find interesting is that on Bitcoin, despite like the sentiment, at least like from the entirety of macro that I've experienced in my lifetime, is probably the most bearish it's ever been. It's not even like in 2022 when we had the 2022 recession and it was like, yeah, it's the yield curve inversion and like, yeah, the rates hike. Now it's like, no, this 70-year paradigm of globalization has ended. Global trade is dead, yada, yada, yada. It's a total trade war, which I think is exaggerated, but that's the sentiment right now. But if you look at prices, Bitcoin is at, okay, it hasn't even broken like the lows of the high 70s, which we've seen a couple of weeks ago. The S&P is down 12%. The Nasdaq is down 18 or something percent. It's not even in like typical recession territory. The S&P is at the same price level as like back in September last year. Given for how bad the sentiment is, the prices are still concerningly high. And that makes me a little more hesitant to buy more than I'd actually like to, because I really like to bid uncertainty. If it's geopolitical uncertainty or macroeconomic uncertainty, it's just whenever there's this imagination, now we've entered a new paradigm, blank slate, we don't know what to do. In the mid to long run, if it's an asset you have high conviction on, it's usually a good time to buy. And for Bitcoin, I certainly have that high conviction in the mid to long run. Yeah, I want to buy more, but I'd prefer taking these lows in the high 70s that we've seen, I think, on mid-March or somewhere around that, and then ride it up again and not buy in the mid 80s while sentiment is at an all-time low since COVID, the crash in March 2020. So yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant on that side. If we take these lows, I'll definitely yeet my last stablecoin stack into the pristine, scarce, funny internet money. On the altcoin front, it's just looking horrible. There's no systemic bidder for any of that stuff. Everybody is trying to de-risk. The whole tariff situation and macro uncertainty is also just accelerating what we've seen, that Bitcoin and altcoins are getting more and more detached from another. And we don't have these classic Bitcoin season, alt seasons. It might even be time to declare the 4-year crypto cycle dead. That might be a counter trading indicator for you, because you're more of a cycle believer. But again, on-chain activity has gone down significantly. All the polymarket users have left. The pump.fun revenue is declining. The ETH gas fees are at a 5-year low. It's just, there has been zero incremental retail adoption this cycle. There's no net growth. I'd even argue the opposite, because you might argue, okay, like in total, there's more people in the crypto ecosystem than there is before, even though I don't think this is true. But if you look at how these people act, they're more isolated in these different sectors now. Like some people only do memes, other people only do DeFi, other people only do perps. And back in 2021, it was this like age of exploration. Something new came out and like everybody wanted to try it out. People were more open, and people were more agnostic, not so like preoccupied with other stuff, and less less prejudice against
less
like
PvP.
and crypto. Yeah, less PvP. It was more like, hey, like there's interesting technology, let's try out what we can do with that. Right now you don't have that. You don't have user inflow, you don't have a systemic bidder. Macro uncertainty is unequivocally bearish, these risk assets. Meme coins totally failed as an onboarding vehicle until now, because all the people who like got onboarded through it like either are only trenching on Solana in a total zero-sum PvP game, or they got rugged by Hayden Davis with Libra and have left the space already again. Or maybe they downloaded Moonshot to yeet $10 into Melania coin, but that's it. They never converted into an on-chain user with any customer lifetime values. So yeah, I think on the altcoin front, I still like a couple of projects there, especially on the DeFi side. I still love Pendle. Hyperliquid has a good product. Ifina also has a good product, even though like right now they don't generate.
Right, now you're shilling your bags. Let me comment.
Yeah, shill yours.
No, I'm not gonna shill anything. But what I want to say is, starting with your first point. So Bitcoin, thinking about buying it in the high 70s, or whether it's touches 69K or whatever. I've seen all these charts and TAs. is premature optimization. Like, who cares? I would say if you believe in it, just DCA in. And when the market is oversaturated or when there's euphoria or parabola, just DCA out a little bit so you can DCA back in again. I don't try to optimize and trade. I genuinely don't trade BTC. I'm not a good trader, but I've seen all these charts and I don't think it's worth it. Depending on your size and depending on your sophistication, if you're a very, very sophisticated trader, you know what you're doing, you know how to hedge against it, you have professional tooling, you have proximity to the trading venues and the clearing houses, sure, then go exploit your edge. But that's basically the main point regarding altcoins I'm going to say. I believe touching altcoins right now does not make any sense whatsoever unless you have insider information or an edge. So if you have insider information, and not meaning to make this sound like an illegal thing, but if you are deep in the community, you're deep in the trenches of your project, you know what's coming, you know the roadmap, you go to the meetups, you go to the hackathons, you have access to information that others may not have to the same extent. That's the only exception, I would say. If that's not the case and you're just browsing trading tools and data tools and Binance looking for your next meme coin or altcoin, I would say do not touch it right now. In times of uncertainty and in this situation, it's literally suicide and the worst thing you can do financially, in my opinion. So I would not touch that. Regarding the trenches, I do agree. It's very PvP, and I think PvP is a net negative. But I still want to add the notion that adoption in crypto has never been linear. Adoption in crypto has always been more like a step function. Like you have these bursts of adoption, whether it's Trump launching a meme coin or it's, another catalyst. And then 80-90% of these net new users disappear again. Slowly over time, they bleed out. They hate crypto. They lose money. They tell it's all a scam until the next catalyst. And you have these people that then come back and at some point they, with more experience, don't get rugged, but maybe they actually find a community that they like and they find a project where the technology looks really exciting, for example, and they go invest in that. And then they have fun with the community. And I think it's a completely different story. So in that sense, I'm less bearish. I do agree that the trenches are cooked. I do think that especially Solana is extremely PvP. Pump.fun is far from being dead. The revenue looks extremely healthy. It's one of the best business models I've seen ever. And with all the products they're planning, I think it's actually looking pretty good what they're doing. I mean, they're basically facing Binance, like Jupiter, Pump Fun, all these products. They're going against Binance. So to some extent, hyperliquid, which is why we've seen this funny situation with Jelly a couple weeks ago. But I'm much more bullish on the on-chain adoption side and on what's happening on-chain. I'm short-term bearish on altcoins with regards to price performance, and long-term I'm bullish on everything, price and adoption and integration deeper into our day-to-day life.
Can you give a more specific time horizon? Do you think, okay, this cycle is now over or just postponed, or are there specific triggers that would make you bullish again?
So regarding the cycle, I would say I would take a guess and say this may be the last cycle as we know it. Because if Bitcoin is approaching the market cap of gold, which it slowly is, it's like 10x away from it or something like that. So I think there's another 10, 15x left in Bitcoin to approach gold's market cap. And then I think the 4-year asymmetric cycle dynamic will disappear. I think then something new will happen. The most likely outcome is it will just follow overall macro performance and just follow the market. It's going to overperform, underperform at times. I think the volatility will still be much, much higher than in gold, for example. But I don't think there is another asymmetric upside left in Bitcoin, which is not a bad thing. That's what I want. I want the stability of it because I don't want to wake up one day seeing Bitcoin at 5K and be like, oh, okay, but it could go to 5 million. No, I want to know that, it's going to approach a million. It's going to stay there relatively stable at some point. So in that sense, I think for altcoins and other tokens, this will be significant and the dynamic will change and we're going to see many cycles that will have completely different catalysts. So far, one of the catalysts has always been the halving, the Bitcoin halving, and some lag after the bull market started. And I think that will change completely. And the type of catalyst will change. And even within the deep, deep bear market, we're going to see mini bull markets in a niche that is still subculture. reserved to only those in the trenches because they are in 500 Discord groups at the same time. To answer your question, I don't think this cycle is topped at all. I think it will continue towards the end of the year. The only question mark I have is whether it's going to top the end of this year or it's going to top the beginning of next year. That's the only thing I wouldn't feel comfortable answering, but I don't think the cycle has topped. No.
No, I mean, directionally, I agree that we are still in for megalomania speculation season. It's going to come at some point in time. Again, it's an incentive game. All the stuff that Trump is doing right now, he's not going to gamble away the prices of stock indices because he has to pump it up again with the midterms slowly crouching up. We will see QE. We will see lower rates. There will be measures implemented that pump risk assets again. To conclude, like my takeaways are the mid to long-term thesis for Bitcoin is as valid as it's ever been. I mean, volatility in like the global landscape is increasing. This is bullish Bitcoin. It is exactly what it is designed to do. It is like supposed to be a system hedge. Now you see the system crumbling. Like it is literally the only purpose that asset has to fill that gap. And this gap is like slowly widening and like pretty obviously widening. And Bitcoin is there to take it. On the altcoin front again, like that is much more dependent on like global liquidity. Fully agree with you that right now during peak uncertainty, if you're buying with a short-term time horizon, you're taking a pretty risky bet. If you identify projects that ideally like also have substance in terms of revenue or market capture and growth to them, and are just not pure, okay, this tech might be exciting in 3 years because it's having a ZK proof or parallel computing or whatever technical jargon they use. If you still have these assets and accumulate more for the mid to long term, I don't think you're doing a mistake here or you're making a mistake here. Probably everybody who has bought in 2024 is by now down bad on many of these things. The whole AI agent hype got totally destroyed, down 90%, many of these assets. On the meme coin front, you see very similar dynamics. I mean, what else saw a run? I mean, the nice DeFi plays, they're also down 60, 70 or more percent. Yeah, it's... you have to make a decision. Either you like capitulate into the uncertainty or
I just think that
conviction there.
So 2 things on that. One thing is that the market depth and the liquidity for most of crypto is much, much thinner than people think. With the exception of major alts and Bitcoin, for probably any other asset, any form of insider owning single-digit percentages of supply could tank the market, especially the spot market. And that's why I think people are just escaping and trying to hoard cash right now in times of uncertainty. And I think that's a good strategy generally. So overall, it's no surprise that this is happening. So having in mind liquidity is thin and having in mind major players are seeking a cash, it's not a surprise. By the way, speaking of major players, have you seen the Wintermute situation and the Wintermute nuke on Binance? Where they dumped a bunch of tokens, or I don't know if they dumped them, but there's like it held large percentages of supply of certain tokens. And then apparently there's a strategy where they long the token and they spot sell them. But because of the longs, other backfillers and market makers are going short and on the perps. And there's a mechanism basically, I forgot how it works exactly, that allows market makers like Wintermute to sell large percentages of their supply. And then they max withdraw kind of like collateral from their long position and just let it die, just let it liquidate. But there's still
what the hyperliquid whale did. So essentially another counterparty has to take over that large derivatives position.
I don't know if it's the same situation, but this was basically more what, for example, Wintermute is doing on Binance in order to exit their positions of which they hold large supply of without tanking the spot market. Because if they would sell in spot, they would tank the market, so they would get a worse execution. But if they, go the strategy with longing perps, which then apparently like gets other people to spot buy, and then they slowly sell spot, and then they max withdraw their perp long and just let it liquidate. Apparently, like that is a better way for them to exit their positions. Suzu has tweeted about this recently. No, but there's been this meme of a bunch of charts that Wintermute is also allegedly market making on, and you see this like massive rat candle down. One of the projects that stayed in mind with this AI project called Arc that went from I think 190 million to like 80 million or something in a single candle or in 2 candles, which looked brutal. So just to remind people that liquidity in crypto markets is extremely thin. And additionally, if you have something like pump.fun, for example, it is so easy to pump and dump the price of it because of the liquidity. And we could in some episode we could go deeper into the mechanism of how the pool works. Because like of the 0.25% fees, 5% goes to the protocol, 0.2% goes to the liquidity pool. If a coin in the beginning has low volume, it's literally just the liquidity from the migration. I mean, now there's no migration anymore because of PumpSwap, but it's literally just the initial liquidity that is in the pool, which is nothing. It's a very, very low percentage. So if a token at some point has millions in volume over weeks and months, I think that's very positive for the liquidity position, because the liquidity position, because of the fees, keeps growing and keeps getting deeper. But other than that, these positions are extremely fragile. And I think people don't realize how fragile they are. Like, that's why many will end up backholding. And that's why I also think it's not a good time to experiment right now. It's a good traders market though, because good traders will be able to have like quick multiples because of that dynamic of the liquidity being so thin.
You always have to stay on your toes as a trader, especially if you're high time frame trader. I don't think you're having a good time right now. The low time frame guys, just because volatility picking up, panic picking up, they have a bunch of stuff to extract value from. And I think for them, it could be paradise right now. Yeah. But anybody who's like, yeah, I'm trying to trade the cycles or like just swing trade, most of them have not sold the top in December. Most of them are down bad. Maybe you have a little bit of stable coins left, and now you're very, very uncertain whether it's a good time to buy. And surprise, surprise, we can't give a definitive answer to that question either.
Liquidation and therapy. Max, it was awesome. It was an awesome therapy. Looking forward to the next one.
It was a good session. Let's see which macro, crypto, and AI news have unfolded until the next one.
Awesome, man. See you next time.
See you.
Ciao, ciao.